who haven't been on a meeting before, we want to try to keep it as informal as possible. So we'll have Dr. Elahi just talk about his background and his career path. And then, if you have a question, you can certainly, raise your hand in the chat or feel free to take yourself off mute to ask. And then hopefully, we'll be able to get to everyone who has a question. So, I guess, Dr. Elahi, do you want to just start from whatever point in time in your life that you want to start with, and then go from there?
Very well. Well, thank you for having me, and I see a lot of familiar faces. So I guess this goes beyond just students and involves residents. Well, I don't know the structure of the conversation here, but I'm a Sinai alum. I just noticed that I've actually been a physician for now exactly half of my life. So it's a
wow.
milestones that we don't want to admit to, but is true. So I could take it from anywhere that any point that is of interest to you. I don't want to go through a whole.
Do you want to maybe just start with how you decided to enter your specialty, and then maybe from there?
Yeah. So I entered medical school with a very highly surgical bent of interest. My father was a pediatric surgeon, so I kind of grew up around medicine. I then, by the end of the second year, I was very much interested in medical specialties. I found them intellectually really challenging, and so I was sort of leaning toward that. That's when actually Val Fuster, who had just returned to Sinai, became my advisor, and he has remained my advisor for the last 24 years.
Wow.
We're friends, and our families know each other. And so I approached him at the time when I was I think a second year medical student, and say, would you be my advisor? At the time I was leaning toward cardiology. And third year, the actual experience was really revealing, because I found myself much more drawn to the surgical mentality. And not to say that the medical mentality is not correct, and we all need, our primary care doctors, but I kind of like the finite nature of surgery, the sort of, see it and treat it type of attitude. And I really enjoyed my surgical specialties. And at the time at Mount Sinai, we had 5 weeks of required subspecialty rotations. And that's when we rotated through ophthalmology and ENT and orthopedics, urology, and anesthesia. And my experience of being in the ophthalmology clinic was just fantastic. And I think to some extent, I think the people who were involved made a difference. The resident who was there was really engaged in teaching. And so I think the personalities inspired me. And I ended up doing an elective with a mentor, Monica knows him well, Murray Meltzer, who unfortunately passed away about 3 years ago. And his personality, the ethics with which he approached patients, just inspired me. So I ended up actually doing the same subspecialty that he had done. So I think people influenced me a lot, the people, but the interest in ophthalmology comes from a number of different aspects. I think so, I see Amber, who was recently there, so we had this conversation, but I like surgery. I like the long-term relationship with patients. So I like that part of medicine, and ophthalmology sort of marries both. I was very much interested very early on in global health, and I was looking for specialties that I could figuratively carry in my back, so I could go anywhere and have a very large impact in a small space of time. And all of these appealed to me on a more sort of a fundamental level. On a softer level, the people, when I went to rounds in ophthalmology, it was sort of right after general surgery, and there was this civility about the place that in general surgery, frankly, wasn't there, at least at the time. I think times have changed a lot in 25 years, but it was sort of there was a way about people, like, kind of like, there were doctors and surgeons, but they sort of spoke to each other and with in civility. And I was drawn to that, the people. So I think the combination of, and then I like the idea of microsurgery. That really drew me. I kind of found that once you magnify the eye, it looks like a different planet altogether. And that part really, really appealed to me. I think, what the reason to choose oculoplastics, again, was largely driven by my mentor, but also by the desire to be more of a surgeon, sort of not so much of a super microsurgeon, but have macrosurgery. So I ended up pursuing more than just ophthalmology. It's essentially facial plastics and ophthalmology as a double field. And so we do a lot of sort of more macro, regular type of surgery in oculoplastics. But that was the appeal for me. So I'll stop here. Maybe if there are other questions or comments before we proceed. But yeah, I would say it was the people and then the subject matter, which I like to know a lot about certain things as opposed to know a little bit about a lot. So it's, and then what I usually tell a lot of students, which is, I think early on, there is such thing as a surgical mentality or a medical mentality. I think surgeons, for the large part, are surgeons almost like, to start with. And if you're a surgeon not doing surgery, you're kind of miserable. And if you're not a surgeon being forced in the OR, you also are miserable. So there is something about the environment of, I guess, the stress of the OR, but also sort of the whole dynamics of an operating room that it either turns you off entirely or is highly appealing. And for me, it was highly appealing. I kind of liked the whole, from the stressors, but also, the lightness, the banter, the sort of relationship with the anesthesiologist, sort of the, that element was very, I found it to be an environment that resonated with me.
Yeah, have you heard of people describing the state of flow?
Yeah.
I feel like when I'm in the OR, I'm in flow.
Yeah, I actually literally use that word. I think there's, you don't feel the body fatigue, and you know it after surgery, but during surgery, and you don't see time pass.
Yeah.
And when things are going well, you're doing cases that you're well experienced in. There's almost like a lightness to the way you are that is really hard to replicate in the clinic. In the clinic, you feel a lot of gratification because you're having a human interaction, you're talking, there's a mind. But the OR, this movement between the intellect and the hand, and then, if you're in a comfortable OR situation where the team is moving all together, there's something about being part of a group where everybody knows what they're doing, from the nurses to the anesthesiologists to the residents and the students, et cetera. If everybody's sort of, doing their job well, it's an immensely satisfying environment that it's actually addictive, frankly. You just want to be there again. Yeah.
Could you possibly, for the sake of the students, explain in a little more detail about what our subspecialty is?
The oculoplastics. So oculoplastics is now officially about half a century old, a little bit more than that, as an official specialty in the US, but it's been around for some time. It's essentially a marriage of facial plastics and ophthalmology. Now, initially, I think that the reason the specialty started to exist is that there are a lot of things that are happening around the eyes that are not the eyes, that required that people have a training in facial plastics. And so you had this watershed, need where facial or general plastic surgeons really didn't know the microanatomy and the details of the eye and had to understand vision and optics. And then the ophthalmologists really didn't have the skill set to be able to handle things like, Lefort fractures and so on and so forth. And so I think it came out of a necessity, and it started sort of, I would say, as a fairly minor club with a number of people getting together. And over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 decades, has grown into a much more defined specialty with required training. Now it's a 2-year official training with fellowship. It is, I believe, still the most competitive subspecialty of ophthalmology. And it's like learning a whole new field, frankly. You go from the world of the micro and have to learn a whole set of new skills. But it crosses from the world of functional. So we have, whether we're doing fractures or tumors, we do oncology, we do congenital problems, we do aesthetics. So it involves, anywhere from Botox to fillers to, blepharoplasties and then age-related changes that are sometimes very functionally important, from ptosis to ectropion. And so it's a really varied set of conditions that we deal with. And that's actually what makes it interesting. I think for the students, it's commonly the misconception is that if you specialize, that you're narrow. And as a matter of fact, I think the reality is different, is as you specialize, you widen. You're kind of narrower when you're general, because again, as soon as it gets interesting, you're passing it on. When you're a tertiary care specialist, you're the recipient, you're the last on the line, where you're taking care of a problem that is, fairly unique. In the US, the official membership of the American Society of Ophthalmic Plastics, I think it's about 650. You could correct me if I'm wrong, about maybe 700 or so at this time. So it's relatively sizable, but it's a niche specialty. Ophthalmology has about 9 specialties. Some are 1 year trainings, and others are 2-year trainings. And about 50% of ophthalmologists who come out of training nowadays, maybe about 60 at this point, go on to pursue a fellowship training. Even though, you could continue to practice general ophthalmology, which, by the way, I still kind of like, again, for the same reason that we mentioned. There's something nice about seeing a family over a period of 20 years for, regular stuff. And there's a part of me that, it's not necessarily financially lucrative, but it's gratifying to be able to carry people over large swaths of time.
Is there anything that you don't like about your specialty?
That's a good question. No, I would say I pretty much like everything about it. I think the things that I don't like are common to all doctors. Extra burdens of administration and regulation sometimes hampers our ability to take care of people in a way that feels right. And I think those are but those are, I think, systemic to medicine. And that fight has been going on for, I think, decades, where doctors have a slightly different view of what gives them joy, as opposed to people who are looking at us as sort of in undifferentiated terms. So yeah, I think those are the frustrations have to do with that. And obviously, when you're, I think that the parts that, that bring me down is having complications from surgery, which, I'm sure you'll be surprised to know that I have, on occasion. But those are, there are moments that surgery carries moments that are very high and moments that are very low. And I think those are sometimes a little difficult to handle, but I think that's the nature of the practice of medicine. For the most part, what I really like about my subspecialty is that it allows for a balanced life. I know people sort of stereotype the world of ophthalmology. What is it? I think there's an acronym for ophthalmology, radiology, dermatology.
Oh, yeah. Roads, right? Or something.
Roads,
right.
Yeah. And I think that
Road
it's
to
not
happiness.
like all stereotypes, they're usually not completely true, but I think there is a truth to the fact that my nights are generally pretty predictable. And yes, we do, and earlier on in my career, I did a lot of calls. As a matter of fact, I was the one who did every trauma call for every night, when I was single. And so it would call me because that was how it went. And for about 4 years, I covered literally every single call. But nowadays I don't do that as much, and the burden of emergency and ophthalmology is not that much. Obviously, when you operate, if there's a bleeder or something like that, you have to address it. But for the most part, I think it allows for people who have interests that go beyond medicine to be able to pursue those interests at a substantial level. It does lend itself pretty well to, I think, what a balanced family life and other pursuits. One of the things I would say I appreciate about it is that because the burden of call is not onerous, people amongst our field are very courteous. I get routinely calls from other colleagues. Hey, can you cover me for 2 weeks? I'm going away. I just say yes, and that's easy. I know I'm not going to be like coming every third night. I don't think obstetricians will easily take on somebody else's call for 2 weeks. They have to all balance it out or get paid for it, or because a call in OB is a real call, and your night's gone waiting for it. So I think for the most part, I enjoyed that. I think it's a very intellectually rich field. I love the advancements that have occurred in our field. Sometimes I feel that ophthalmology in some respects advances faster than some other fields, and but to some extent because we could see everything. So it's this marriage of physics and medicine, it's of great interest to a lot of specialties like neurology and neurosurgery and all these, because you're looking at living brain live. So it's a very active, intellectually active field where there's a lot of research. And so whatever your bent is, whether it's academic, surgical, or long-term sort of family care style, you could find your space, you could find your place in it. So I would say over, I've now been about 21 years or so of being done with residency, I found myself increasingly happier with my choice, and having less doubts about it. And I would suspect that's true of a lot of other fields, but I don't always find that with my generalist colleagues. I think there's the world doesn't treat them as well, frankly, and it's not a fair thing to say. But it's the sad reality. They're more commoditized by regulation and institutions. And so, we are a finite entity. We only train about 450 to 500 ophthalmologists a year in the whole country. That's for 330 million. You could count a less than 1,000 people, the number of entrants. So, even though people in New York and LA and Chicago may not feel very valued, really as a country, being a eye specialist is highly valued, and you really don't worry about being employed. You may not find your ideal place like any other marketplace, but it's generally a satisfactory life. And I would say, the sense I get from my other colleagues, go to meetings and academy meetings, is that while we all face challenges, for the most part, the ophthalmologists and their subspecialists are generally a pretty satisfied bunch, and generally a pretty quiet bunch. They're not very boisterous.
So can you talk a little bit about the other big part of your career, which is the global health component, just how that started and what you do with it? I thought that was interesting that you said you were looking for a specialty where you could kind of take it out of your back pocket and start treating.
Yeah, so I think this traces back a little bit to maybe why medicine was important to me. I think it came from really a set of family values. My father did a lot of charitable medicine, and I remember accompanying him to the hospital. Back in the days, you could actually go. I was able to be in the OR at the age of 8, 9, something like that.
What? Really?
Yeah. It would allow it. My dad was the pediatric chair, so nobody, so that's not going to happen today.
Yeah.
From eons ago. But that was transformative. I remember one particular case of a case he worked on throughout the night as a congenital anomaly. And at the end of the case, he was like, the baby's not going to survive. Although, he tried his best. He spent 6 hours putting the baby together. And then, we went and talked to the parents. And I distinctly remember that interaction where, how much he was showing them that he was trying his best, and the hope he was, while being realistic. And that marked me. I actually wrote about it in my essay. To medical school. And so I entered medical school with this idealism, like many of you probably did, is that, I didn't think for a moment about the economic aspect of medicine. I don't even think I cared about like income whatsoever. It was sort of this pursuit of this vocation. It was sort of like priesthood of being able to make a difference. And because it seemed like just such a rich experience of life. So and global health, I've lived in 3 continents. I've seen my life story probably would take another session, and it's not of interest probably to you. But I've seen a fair amount of like tough stuff, and the places I've been to, traveled to nearly now 90 countries. So my experience in international, seeing sort of the world as it is in both the ups and downs, really sort of shaped my persona, and I couldn't see medicine practice without that as part of my life. So it was sort of a personally non-negotiable aspect of medicine that I had to go there and contribute. The reason I like global health, and the reason I think it's different than just charity locally, is that for me, global health is doing work in places that have no alternative. Now, in the US, we have a lot of like disparities, and there are a lot of issues, but for the most part, the majority of people have the alternative. They could, if they have Medicare, they could get on a bus and drive 8 hours and see the chairman of a department. Whereas in Cambodia, you're just told to die. And I think that differentiation made me more interested in the sort of the really resource poor regions of the world. And it's not to say that we do a fair amount of work here locally too, but that was what drew me to travel. And I think then the other part of it, which is maybe a softer psychological part, is the idea of loving adventure and being able to marry that. I think we all sort of, well, I grew up in Albert Schweitzer Street in France, so I clearly knew about Albert Schweitzer and that kind of view of the world where you kind of went around. And so I think a lot of it was also sort of a, bright-eyed adventurism in the beginning, that, just the sense of fun of being challenged and being in a village in, East Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. But over time, it certainly has evolved into a different sense of what it is to be a physician. So I think those to me are very core. They go beyond specialty. It's sort of, how you see yourself, your values, and your place in the world, and the meaning of your profession. And I think, to me, medicine in general allows you to sort of marry your values with the life you live. I always tell medical students, it's amazing that I don't have a meaningless day. One of my friends who is a director at a major bank now, and we were sort of the same cohort, can't say that. He could make millions of dollars, but he can't get that sort of satisfaction of having transformed a life. And so that's the part of medicine that I think is just awesome, and it gets really amplified when you're the only option in town. I think the difference between here and when I go overseas is that if I don't make that trip, that person doesn't get the treatment. It's a sort of a binary view. Here, maybe I could do a little bit better, a little bit worse, but it's sort of analog, and overseas, if I don't remove the eye with a retinal blastoma, the kid dies. It's that simple. It's not like they wait next year and they go to the capital or something. And I faced that. I mean, my specialty, death is not common, but on our missions we do face that. We face pretty extensive oncological sort of cases, and you can make a real difference, even in my field. And so I mean, I could talk to you about those experiences at a different time or today.
That the group that you travel with, is that your group, or it's
So it's in after 9/11, and I was involved in some of the rescue work, as a physician, not as a primary rescue. A group of professionals at the time, we were all in our early 30s, from different walks of life, from medicine, business and law. We kind of felt like, maybe we're at a point where we could put our resources together and do something that makes a difference. Really, it's hard to imagine now, but for those of us who were there, the world seemed really dark afterwards. That you kind of felt that that's how the world's going to be, like terrorism and death and destruction. There was sort of a doom and gloom about the world, which eventually didn't pan out to be the case until Corona. So I think, again, I would say part of it was idealism, sort of, again, not knowing, but wanting to do something. So we got together and created a foundation with the idea, with not a lot of clarity about what we're going to do. We're just going to do something. And at the first, we were having a lot of sort of meetings and conferences and media type of thing. And over time, we really focused on action. So the idea was, where if I'm spending time away from my work and not doing the kind of things that are just fun, that it should actually be accountable and actionable. So we started doing work overseas. I've traveled also with other groups. I've traveled with C International, which I think Dr. Dweck knows well. And then, I've been part of the Global Health Initiative at Sinai since its inception. Ramon Murphy and I go way back, well, he passed away. He's sort of the initiator of the Global Health Project. And so, it's involved an institution as well. So we've traveled with countless students or residents, and Mount Sinai has been part of that. So it's been through the foundation, through Sinai, and sometimes in collaboration, a lot of collaboration with other institutions, and then usually local governments, where we work with, whether it's Cambodia or Ghana or Mongolia, we always work through the Ministry of Health. So it's a large collaborative work. The administration of which, to me, ultimately doesn't really matter. Is the idea that you could with your knowledge make a difference. The idea for it, like the work in Mongolia, and Nitin was with me. I see him here. We traveled together last year or 2 years ago. The initiative now has been about 12 years old, and we've treated over 12,000 patients. And that started with a conversation with a third-year medical student while we were in the middle of Bong County, Liberia, doing another medical mission with some of the Sinai faculty. And I think that there's something so beautiful about that. If you just sort of see the butterfly effect, that a little conversation in a faraway village in Liberia leads to 12,000 people and over 2,000 surgeries, and that goes beyond my field. As we have neurosurgeons and liver surgeons and ENT and head and neck and a whole bunch of other specialties. So I think there's something really rewarding about sort of seeing that happen, which again only medicine can achieve at that scale. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of other questions. So I think if people either want to put into the chat or take yourself off mute, feel free.
I'm just going
to, yeah.
Dr. Colvin, just jump in here. Dr. Elahi, it's so nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Plug for all the students. Definitely, once things open up again, the trip to Mongolia was, I'd say, life-changing for me. I went a couple of years ago with another co-med student of mine, Bonnie Sklar, who's now a first-year resident at Wills, for some of you who may know her. Amazing. Dr. Elahi, I had a question about something you mentioned a little bit earlier about the world not being as kind to generalists. It sounded like you were referring not to comprehensive ophthalmologists, but to non-specialists in general.
Yes, I think that's true. Yes, I think, and again, I don't think it's fair, but again, if it's the reality of the marketplace, frankly, and that it's rare commodities tend to have higher value, and it's not maybe the way the world is, but for those of you who studied business, it's like Pareto's law, right? So it's just how it works. So I think there is I think our specialty generally is valued, and the ophthalmologist wouldn't agree, because we always the group think makes you always think that you're not quite where you should be. I think that's a what I would call a visual field defect. But when you look at it more holistically and sort of the real marketplace, I mean, ophthalmologists tend to be in the top 1 percentile of earners in the United States. Yeah, that's true of many specialties. I think Dr. Colvin's specialty is also the case. Again, you may not feel it when you're looking at your cohort because you're comparing yourself to that. But when you zoom out and look at the world as a whole, it is, we do really well. And there, a lot of this data is out there. Nowadays, Doximity puts it out, and you can sort of see where, the median ophthalmology salary is in the, 300s. So you can't say people don't do well there. And so I think we tend to you tend to have a lot of options. Again, even though it may not seem that way. I think one of the things that I think students and sometimes residents feel is that you're biased toward hearing the things that don't work, especially from your attendings. You're in the OR, they've dealt with a lawsuit or some kind of challenging billing situation or whatever, and that's what they're going to talk about. Rarely do people talk about, oh, this is just like fantastic that I have, that somebody's trusting me with an act of putting a blade on their eyeball. I mean, when you think about it, like that is an enormous amount of trust. Somebody meets you for 10 minutes and next thing you know, you're like sticking him in their most precious organ. And I think it's just a magical thing. And we tend to, if we are too much of a resonating chamber, we forget what a magical thing it is to be in medicine. And I think in ophthalmology in particular. I would say though, again, in fairness, like when I was looking at specialties, I think there is a difference between general specialties and subspecialties. I think there is a slightly different quality of life between general surgeons and, let's say, ortho, urology, neurosurgery, ENT, ophthalmology. But when you get to like things like ophthalmology versus ENT, I think perhaps it's the people who drive you, your mentors. It may not be as, people tend to have a retrospective bias to say what they did was like inevitable. Like most purchases, you tend to have a confirmation bias. But I do think that, had I met an equally insightful, enlightened mentor as Dr. Meltzer in ENT, maybe I would have been a head and neck surgeon at this point. So I think there is a little bit of a, give there. And but that the point about medicine is that almost every specialty of medicine really is delightful. I couldn't be a very good psychiatrist. I think I could tell you that, or a good pathologist. But I maybe if that had taken me into orthopedics, I would have been maybe.
Yeah, right. Looks like you got 2 questions. Ed, do you want to just go ahead and ask it?
Hi, Dr. Elahi. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. So my question is more about, okay, so my background, I'm a foreign medical graduate and I'm in the master's for clinical research program at Sinai. And that already says that I have quite a huge interest in global health and my current bent in clinical research. I'm thinking just to understand what your thoughts are about expanding clinical research in low resource countries and the potentials for integrating that into what you're already doing. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, so the conversation about how to do global health right, in essence, and to pursue some academic work in global health is really a long one. And I'm happy to take this offline with you because it's an area that I've given a lot of thought about. And we just published in the last 3 months a compendium of all the NGOs and healthcare facilities in the 24 poorest countries in the world. It's the first compendium of its kind. The reason it's a complex thing is because there are a lot of overlays on that. There's this whole conversation about sustainability and sort of being sort of critical of the way mission work is done. And I completely agree with that. And so there's a desire for academic work and global health research to be much more comprehensive. At the same time, I find that, that creates an ivory tower that's disconnected from the reality on the ground. And there are people currently today that are suffering. And so the philosophy that I personally espouse is that real change in global health is going to happen with data and with science and with the exchange of knowledge, and which is the work that we're doing. We're working on creating this marketplace of better exchange and information. But then there's this whole view of today. What do we do just now? And these projects, I've been at this like global health research project for 6 years, the fruits of which may never really translate into a change on the ground. I mean, the book comes out, but who's going to use it? I don't know. And so I think I have this view of doing what you can now for the people today. You don't get on a high horse and thinking that, your 2-week mission is really that meaningful for the world as a whole, because it isn't. The data doesn't support that these small sort of interactions are. And there's a lot of question about whether you're doing it right and the follow-up and sort of the ethics of working elsewhere. And again, I won't get into that. But I do think after looking at this, analyzing it deeply, I think, we as physicians have an opportunity to make a difference where we can't. We should obviously do it right and ethically. But, if you're really interested in global health, I would say professionally, that you need to move beyond mission work. And mission work, the era of sort of discrete mission is coming to an end as the world is getting more sophisticated and able to take care of the smaller problems themselves. They don't need you to travel with your stethoscope, and so I think, the contribution to global health requires people who are much more familiar with data analytics and able to contribute with much deeper knowledge. And but I don't find these exclusive. I think you do the work you can today while you can, and then you use your mind to create systems and work systematically. I'm against sort of dismissing sustainability. I also against people who only tout sustainability and forget the present. I think that's sort of looking down your nose on people who go on trips is I don't think justified either. I don't know if that answered your question, but that sort of shares my philosophy of global health. It's a sort of an in-between view of neither being a cowboy nor this sort of ivory tower disconnected, critic of all work being done.
So Daniel, do you want to ask a question about global health also?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Elahi, again for being here. My question was, how did things change last year with the pandemic ramping up, and what are going to be the changes in the future as a result of that?
Yeah. So I'm really interested in seeing the data 5 years down the line about sort of what happened to the global burden of disease and all those things, as a result of this. So essentially all missions stopped because the world stopped accepting it. I mean, even if I'm vaccinated, the places I go to don't want me because they're just not accepting these. And on the logistics, there is a huge amount of logistics involved in these missions. They're very costly and you can't make it work. And so over the last year, we haven't engaged in that, but that's actually where we ramped up the academic work, and we're doing essentially machine learning to be able to identify those places that need care. And I think the insights that are coming out of that are truly fascinating. I mean, one of the things that is like exciting and that we're currently working on is, understanding which environment needs what level of healthcare facility. Looking at whether you need a highly tertiary, secondary, or primary, and what facilities, and you could use machine learning across 50 countries and describe patterns and be able to give an answer to the question of where should we build the next tertiary or secondary hospital. And that kind of work, with distance measurement, population movements, environmental data, even weird things like mammal activity. I mean, there's just so much data out there that is giving us insights, night light data that tells us about population movement and needs, and correlations that are shedding light on these dark spots around the planet. And my firm belief is that the world, the time where we look at the world as 192 countries is over. We have to look at it at millions of regions, and capital cities and country level differentiation no longer means anything, because you go to the capital of Mongolia and there's a Louis Vuitton. That doesn't tell you what's going on in the country. So we have this very granular regional information. And our effort, which has been very extensive, really tens of thousands of hours of teams, in other words, like a team of 30 volunteers, it's not small, has been trying to gain insights, which we feel, if these insights are change behavior of who does what where and who asks for what where, that could have a scale difference in the order of millions. Where you're not sending the wrong people with the wrong set of skills in the wrong place. This is really the travesty of global health. That's why people locally and internationally have decried these missions, because they're mismatched. But if you could properly match them, and that's data science essentially, then you could make a huge difference. So our great concentration has been, it's a consortium of various academic institutions, is trying to gain that insight, which, I thought about 6 years ago, it takes about 3 months. It's been 6 years and full-time data analysts working on it. It is a colossal effort.
Thank you.
Jack and Alan, sorry, who else? Jack and Alan, you guys were one of the first ones on the call. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I actually do have a question. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Elahi, and sharing your experiences with us. My question is, I guess, less on the global health side, but more on just the field of ophthalmology and oculoplastics, and where you see that field heading in the future, and kind of what you're optimistic about for the field in the future.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the reality is that the population growth is going faster than the number of people we are feeding into that. There's an op-ed, I think, in the Times that talked about all the graduates that are not actually going on to residencies. And that's because it was about 10 years ago, I think it was in the Obama era, we opened up the gates to medical school out of a desire to have more trainees. But the same gates did not open to ophthalmology. And obviously there's a 4 to 6 year delay for training. And I don't think that, and it's got, economic, political reasons for that. As a result, it is likely that we would be undersupplied in terms of ophthalmologists. Now, that doesn't necessarily tell you anything about New York, because, urban areas tend to have a hyper concentration of specialties. That's in a free market, people move where they want to go. But in general, as a country, the need for both ophthalmologists and their respective subspecialties is only increasing. About 20 years ago, there was a study that was done to look at ophthalmology from a standpoint of ophthalmologists being primary care providers of eyes or optometrists. Now, there's about 3 to 1, or I would say maybe 3 or 4 to 1 in terms of ratio of optometrists to ophthalmologists. And that study concluded that we had too many residents in ophthalmology, and the AUPO, which is the Association of University Professors of Ophthalmology, decided to cut by 10% the number of spots. Later on, a study showed that was actually an inaccurate analysis, and that it had a certain bias of that viewpoint, and people actually moved to restore the number of specialties. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the providers of eye surgery, I mean, you do the math. You're training less than 500 individuals for a country of 330 million. There's got to be a need for you. So the economic prospects are good. Now, at a more macro level, the pathway of Medicare is a disaster. In other words, it is likely that we won't be able to pay for a lot of the services that we're offering. And administrations keep passing on to the next one. And that's both true of Democrats and Republicans, because really it's very unpopular to tackle the rising costs of providing healthcare in the United States. And a lot of great minds have put their 2 cents into it. But the question is, would there be public money to support what you expect of your lifestyle over the next 30 to 40 years? And that is questionable. Will there always be a market, including a private market, for your effort? I think that I'm comfortable to say yes. But Medicare is going to have to make, we as a country will have to make very hard decisions about our public option. And again, I could go through the economics of that for a whole hour. But there is a systemic sort of, tsunami looming in the background. But that's not related to ophthalmology. It's also true of orthopedics and every other field. And at some point, we have to make it. And again, it's going to, usually what happens is that most administrations sort of push the primary care, but the market actually demands specialties. And that's just the reality that is unlikely to change unless we start to flood the market with specialties. So I think it's a fairly protected moat. Whether that's good for you when you're 80 years old, for you and your family, that's a much harder question to answer. It might be good for your business, but may not be good for you as a recipient of healthcare.
So you sound like
Thank
you're
you.
ready to throw your hat in the ring for the New York City mayor race coming up.
I could think of pretty much everybody I meet in the street that would be more qualified. That race.
Alan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a little bit of a question. Thank you so much for your talk. I was really interested by your point about moving beyond medical missions and into the realm of developing these systems that are required that can service underserved populations. And I was wondering what kind of work you're doing along those lines and where I might be able to look to find out more.
Yeah, these are very, very complex questions to answer. I think, there are some fundamental beliefs that will drive your interventions. If the fundamental belief is that you're going to affect change from a distance, I think that's flawed. Ultimately, the local people will always drive the local markets. And so systematic change from afar is a bit of an oxymoron. And even large foundations like the Gates Foundation have found that, so it's not to say that we despair, but the idea that we could sort of, create these complex moving organisms in an environment of rapid political and socioeconomic change, I think is a falsity. That being said, I think the most effective models is where you're playing support to local leaders and players. So, the people that we work with in Mongolia, from anywhere from the Ministry of Health to like the head of the hospital, or even department heads, or even passionate physicians who care about their country, those are actually the people the people who are most vested are the people who will affect change on a systematic level. Otherwise, it's unlikely that you could understand the dynamics of what happens locally from whatever time you spend, unless you commit yourself to literally being in that market. If you're going and spending 6 years in Tumu in northern Ghana, you may be able to take some of the knowledge you have here and take it there. But most of us like to do this as part of our complete ecosystem of work. And I think there's a humility to be had to say, we really can't know all the moving parts. Listen, we live in the richest city in the country, and I'm sure there's at least a few criticisms that you could levy on the systems of care that we have here. And so what tells us that we could go, halfway across the world and suddenly sort of shine and make a big difference? So I think there's a fundamental belief, and we have idealisms and we sometimes impose them. I think the idea is to be aware of the reality on the ground of what is actually happening, and then and pushing for the change, because you don't want to be sort of an accepting bystander. You want to move things. But I think the most effective ways is to move it within the system. That means that you really have to be part of the local healthcare. You have to be integrated into the culture, accepted by the local physicians. There's no way to really come there and commander your way into healthcare, as one did half a century ago. It was possible to do that, You know, your blood pressure cuff and stethoscope could make a difference a century ago. But now I think you need to work within the system. And then how to do that effectively, overcoming all the issues of changing political winds. You know, I've had more dinners with ministers who are no longer in power than with people that I'm currently working with. And frankly, beyond the first 2 or 3 times where it's kind of cool to be in a, you know, government car with a siren, you know, it really wears off. You know, the week where I wore my suit for the most amount of days and the longest was in Ghana, not in New York. You know, I just got tired of it, frankly. And it you know, half the people I work with thinking of this idealism, and they were all educated in Oxford in the United States. These are highly efficient people. You know, there's government changes and everything's back to zero. So that's why I believe in being nimble. If you're working in resource poor regions, it's not like people are stupid, right? They're resource poor because of certain facts, whether it's history or otherwise, but there's a reason for it. And you know, you need to be aware of that. Anyway.
I think Catherine, did you have a question?
Yeah, just really quickly, thank you so much. This has been so interesting and insightful. I guess I was curious, I feel like I've heard a lot of times of people who go into ophthalmology and then also pursue global health. Do you feel like the field of ophthalmology is uniquely well suited to incorporating sort of global health or global surgery into your career, as opposed to something like maybe orthopedics or ENT? Like, is that due to lifestyle? Is that due to the pathology that exists out there in other countries in low resource settings? I'm just curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's an accurate observation. Actually, the data supports that. You know, ophthalmology is in the top 5 things that people do in terms of global health work. I think that the most common is actually dentistry. You know, it's, you know, so and simply because it lends itself to high frequency, you know, events. You know, you could do a lot in a day. You could do like 30 cataracts if you're skilled in one day. And the transformation of 30 people not being blind is just massive, right? It's very different than, I don't know, like if you do 1 liver transplant, you know. And so it's not to say that that's not important. We actually incorporate those kind of surgeries too, but, you know, high frequency things, and I suspect in orthopedics you have the same thing, you know, like, you know, fractured deformities. You do the surgery, it's fixed, it's done, and you move on. And it lends itself very much to it. And the fact that we're dealing with the world of the small means that you carry a lot. You could carry a lot of equipment, literally carry it. You know, it's very hard, I suspect, for Dr. Colvin to carry a lot of her equipment. It does, but you probably have to have a porter, you know, somebody that comes with you. And orthopedics is one of the specialties that actually does lend itself very much to global health. But, you know, it's that's the kind of thing that makes ophthalmology. And I think one of the things that's really great about ophthalmology is, unlike specialties that rely a lot on history, we kind of see everything. So you could treat a baby and know what you need to do because the information you need to be able to intervene is visible. That's a little bit of a bias of ophthalmology. You're literally looking at the vessels of the retina. You're looking at the whole organ, because of the optics, is kind of visible. So yeah, I certainly think it's one of the specialties that lends its best. And then the other side of it, which is, again, because your work allows the time for you to come home not being completely fried, you could pursue at a high degree this other professional aspect when you're completely done, because, you know, you are spending so much, you know, on call and recovering from call. It's harder. I think I get, at least that's my opinion.
Thank you.
I think there's one last question. Jasmine, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you, Alex. Dr. Elahi, I'm truly amazed by what you shared with us, and many things what you said very resonating because I also finished my medical school in China, and I did a specialty in ophthalmology, trained to be a cataract surgeon. And what you described, how you felt in the operating room, it just literally even, like happened like yesterday. So amazed by all those exquisite instruments. Another thing, you share your perspective about the public health. Really, I think beyond medicine, very fascinating. So thank you. My question is more detailed in ophthalmology, since I'm coming from a different physician training system. Quite wondering how during the residency over here, how will you be able to expose to all subspecialty of ophthalmology?
In the US?
Mm-hmm.
So is the
How's
question,
that?
and during residency, are we exposed to all the subspecialties?
I'm sorry, maybe I should rephrase the way how the ophthalmology choose a subspecialty during, yeah, in the US. Can you please elaborate how that works?
So
Thank you.
the question is whether once you're a resident, how do you choose your subspecialty within residency?
Particularly in ophthalmology, like whether you are going to be the retinal specialist, the glaucoma specialist, right?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it depends a little bit on the specialty you pick. Oculoplastics is fairly early on, so it's one of the specialties that you might have to declare a little bit sooner than others. Most people, most other specialties are chosen in your final year, and you go through an application process. To match. So the ASOPers, which is the American Society of Ophthalmology, has a matching system, and so you do it similar to the way you do a residency match from out of medical school, and it's the same for all the other specialties. So they kind of run their own internal match. I believe, and Dr. Dweck could correct me, I think there's a centralized matching system in ophthalmology. I think some of the subspecialties actually now enter through that system. Again, it's an algorithm that allows you to find the ideal match.
Yes, it's called the San Francisco match, and it is an early match which takes place a couple of months earlier than the regular match for other specialties. And so, yes, you do have to decide early for oculoplastics, especially, um, because it is also an early match when it comes to fellowships. So my advice usually to residents is to start working as early as they can on their interests, to develop research projects, to publish when they can, to gain as much experience and exposure, look at surgeries, participate in surgeries, even if it's at night or on the weekends. Go see as much as you can to try to really focus in on the decision, and then prepare yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But yeah, you go through a similar matching system as you do for medical school. But I would say, at this stage, unless you're very clear about the subspecialty you want to pursue, and some people are, I would just focus, if you're interested in ophthalmology, just getting into an ophthalmology program. And a lot of people sort of change their opinion. They get into it thinking one thing, and then a year into it, and that's how it should be. I think you should keep yourself open. I typically, unless you really are clear that you want to be a retina specialist, in which case it will tell you which residency probably would have the best fellowship match. The majority of people are kind of pluripotent. They kind of just get into the specialty and then decide later on.
Oh, I see. Yeah, thank you very much. Can I follow up with one more question? Quick question.
Please.
Thank you. I'm also doing the clinical research PhD in Sinai. So from your perspective, which specialty in ophthalmology you think get involved the most clinical stage research, if the physician would like to conduct both research and clinical work?
So which
Thank
specialty
you.
of ophthalmology is the most clinical?
Clinical stage research, like as far as I know, maybe glaucoma, mostly like a bench work, to understand the pathological.
You mean which one
More.
has more like basic science research?
Opposite.
Oh,
For
okay.
me,
Well,
yeah,
I would
the
say
least, right?
Dr. Dweck will agree, that our specialties are sort of the most, in some ways, the most clinical. If anything, we kind of lack a little bit of bench research in oculoplastics. We tend to be largely like clinical and surgical. And I think on the other end, glaucoma probably is where you see a lot of and maybe retina and glaucoma is where you get a lot of basic science work. So if you've got a more clinical bent, so the sort of the more cataract surgeons, refractive surgeons, retina surgeons, oculoplastic surgeons, I think are the most sort of surgical of the subspecialties. And then you have neuro-ophthalmology, general medical retina, and uveitis that tend to be much more medical. And yeah, uveitis specialists, I would say invariably are doing some level of, more basic science research because it's essentially immunology for the eyes. So as you go more medical, you tend to go more also lab. And as you go into more surgical, you go more into, devices and clinical.
I would just like to add for everyone, the students and whatever residents are here, that you join the American Academy of Ophthalmology. Keep in mind, we want you to join our field, so it's going to be made as easy as possible for you to do that. And there is a wealth of resources available to you as a medical student to enjoy, to view videos, to get a lot of information. So I would encourage you all to do that.
I would completely agree with you. One of the things I always look for our students is I want to see more than 10 people in the class go into ophthalmology. Like we want you, all the faculty, I think, really want to we want to sort of seduce you into our field. Why, I don't know, but it feels very sort of satisfying to see a large number of the class going into the ophthalmology. It feels like we've succeeded. So I think the idea is that, we want to see colleagues. I see actually a few who are already in residency who are here. So we're looking for you to become colleagues of ours, take you away from the evils of orthopedics into ophthalmology. And yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, the Academy has done an amazing job. And actually, the president of our academy this year is an oculoplastic surgeon, and who's also a friend. So we got a great year. So it's a good year to join.
All right, thank you so much for taking the time out. It was extremely backpacked hour with you. I think we usually get a lot of students emailing afterwards to say, if they can ask you for advice or that sort of thing. So, you just let us know later on how you want to be contacted.
You bet. I always welcome that. And again, I think everybody who's on this call is essentially in our camp. We at Sinai, those of us who sort of like being faculty, and I obviously, the other colleagues who are here, we really enjoy seeing you guys do well. There's, similar to global health, the other sort of, vocational aspect of being a physician is there sort of the teaching and the mentoring. And it's just a load of fun when you see somebody at your stage and you sort of see them 10 years, 15, 20, even later, sort of becoming leaders and physicians who make a difference. There's just an immense amount of satisfaction. It's kind of a high to which you get addicted to. And so I think I certainly personally welcome, helping any one of you in any way I can. You're always welcome to join me in the OR. I usually operate for sure on Tuesdays and sometimes other days. So sometimes that's a good environment because it's sort of, it's we could have conversations while we're operating and you could sort of see and get a feel for how it is. And in terms of the medical missions, we fully expect to resume them as soon as the borders open, and maybe as early as the fall. And those of you who are interested, certainly do let me know. And you know, we work through the global health system within Sinai. We want to make sure that, you know, it's important to declare that early. And again, you know, Nathan was with me. You could always contact him. He could tell you sort of what it involves. It is a lot of work. You know, it is not a cushy trip. You know, you would not sleep a lot at night, and you would work a lot. But that's the whole point. You know, you're going to get beaten up and are really happy for it. That's the paradox. So I hope you will join us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Dr. Elahi.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Doug.